Welcome, everybody. My name's Cameron Skinner. My colleague over here to my right, Brian Keller. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
Hope everyone's having a great build. One thing I do want to start with, has anybody seen the talk that Brian and I gave at TechEd North America? Anyone? A couple? Okay. Full disclosure, you're not going to see that much new stuff. So, I mean, you're welcome to stay here and hang out for my jokes and everything. But, you know, if there's something else that you'd rather go look at, there's going to be a couple new things. But for the most part, a lot of the content we're going to cover that we covered in TechEd, we're going to do this time. Just FYI. Okay? Okay. What we're doing today is we're talking about what's new in Visual Studio 11 application lifecycle management, all the tooling that's involved there. The biggest thing that you should take away from this talk is, you know, you can think of Brian and I as kind of cruise directors. There's a lot of new features that we are going to just cruise by fast, okay? The idea is give you a taste and then give you pointers to other presentations where you can go get more and deeper content around those areas, whatever you're interested in, okay? That's kind of like the biggest purpose of this get-together, okay? There's a few folks in here, and what we want to do is, I always love to have a fairly interactive conversation. It's going to be difficult to do with this many folks. However, we do want to try to make some time at the end and take some questions. So if you can hold your questions till the end, write them down, whatever you need to do. I'm hoping to have some time at the end to have a conversation.
We're also here all week in the ALM hands-on lab area, the booth area, Ask the Experts, so
yeah, that's
we'll
right.
Be around.
That's right. And I am planning on doing kind of like the Visual Studio booth duty. Have you guys been in the exhibition hall yet and seen all the booths? I will actually be at the Visual Studio booth Thursday morning, 8:45 to 11ish or something, and Friday morning. So if you've got feedback, you know, you've now played with the slate for, you know, a couple days, I'd love to get your feedback and then go deep on any other area that you see today, or you've got any other questions, please come by. Okay? Okay. So with that, let's jump into this. What we're going to do today is we're going to spend almost all the time in the bits. Okay? This slide here frames the entire conversation that we're going to have. All right? If you saw, how many folks saw Jason Zander's talk on what's new in Visual Studio this morning? Okay, great. You saw this at one point in that presentation. We're going to use this to frame this whole conversation, and we're basically, the ALM, the Application Lifecycle Management space, we're representing in this slide. It's a cycle. You've got requirements come in. You've got to deal with that as an engineering team. You've got to figure out how do you prioritize those things? How do you break them down into tasks? How do you start to assign it to your team? How do you then go execute and implement those tasks? How do you get that deployed? How do you make sure that your customers are actually getting what they asked for, right? The classic thing is, you know, in terms of requirements, how many times, Jason had this thing this morning, how many times have you built exactly what your customer asked for, but not what they wanted, right? That's classic situation that we all deal with on a daily basis. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to have that guide. We're going to go around this circle, and I'm going to talk about features in our ALM suite of tools that we can apply to this virtuous cycle, if you will. Okay? So with that, I want to start by talking about the requirements and how you deal with requirements. Everyone deals with requirements in one way or another. Either you do something very formal, you have a very big process around requirements, or you do something very ad hoc. Regardless of your process, you're dealing with requirements. Someone needs something, you need to deliver against it. Okay? I want to talk about some new tooling that we've got in the product that helps you envision kind of how do you deal with describing a user experience, for instance, that your customer is asking for, and you want to iterate on that ask before you go spend time building the code, right? So to make sure that you're actually building what the customer needs and not necessarily what they're asking for. Does that make sense? So let's jump into that, Brian.
Sure. So this is a virtual machine that I built that has Visual Studio Ultimate, the developer preview, TFS, the developer preview. You'll actually be able to download this later this week. So if you want to start with the same virtual machine that Cameron and I are using for, I think, all except for one of our demos, then you can grab this, and it's already got pre-configured users and data to get you started. We also have 6 hands-on labs in the hands-on lab area that will also be made available for download as well. So getting back to requirements, we've built a new tool based on PowerPoint that basically allows you to create storyboards right within PowerPoint.
One second. I want to pause you 1 second. Because one thing that Brian just did is he jumped in there. I do want to show you that start menu and show you where you can see this once you get these bits. Because it's not just go to PowerPoint, click PowerPoint. You want to click the PowerPoint storyboarding inside Microsoft Visual Studio 11. That'll just preload PowerPoint with the template that you're going to see here.
That's right. Thank you. And so you can see I've done this here. I've got the storyboarding add-in at the top. And we give you a nice getting started video. So if you're building a greenfield PowerPoint storyboard, you'll want to start watching this video. I actually already have an existing storyboard that we're using for our Fabricam Fiber site. So I'll launch this and show you some of the things that you can do with this. First of all, notice this is just our website that's been modeled here. I can F5 this, and we've got some custom animations we're taking advantage of. It's just a really nice way to communicate what your team intends to build before you write a single line of code, so that hopefully we can expose those disconnects before you invest too much up front. Notice I've got some Windows Phone templates. And of course, you can imagine we'll be adding a lot more templates for you to support Windows 8 and the other types of platforms you might be developing on. So what I'll do is I'll just create a new slide here, and I'll select a layout. And we give you a few layouts to choose from. There's my Windows Phone 7 layouts down there. I've got a SharePoint layout. I already have one that I've created for my site. And so that gives me a really nice, easy way to get started. You can even come in here and say fabricamfiber.com. So these are rich layouts. They're not just static graphic images that you're looking at. Over here we have a shapes library. So as I look down through these shapes, you can see I've got a bunch of icons. You can imagine us building this over time, maybe supporting gestures and other things that can really communicate how you work with these applications. Notice here I have a video player. And again, these aren't just images. I can come in here and edit this so I can say, this is a 15-minute video. So if I wanted to create a new pane here, I can add a button. And maybe let's do something fancy. Let's change the color of this button. Change the font here. We're going to create a new record. And let's say that this is exactly the style that we want to use for buttons throughout our entire application. What we can do is actually save this within my shapes library. So we'll add that to my shapes. Give that a name. That's a Fabricam button. And now what I could do if I wanted to is I could take this shape and actually export this and share it with other members of my team. Now, I don't want to build this completely from scratch. There are some elements in our existing site that I want to take advantage of. So if you can see here, I'm actually trying to build a page that looks kind of like this. So what I can do is come back to screenshots, take a screen clipping, and then just grab this grid right here.
This is key, right? The thing about why did we put it in PowerPoint? Why did we do that? We wanted to get you an experience that you already know very well, right? Everyone has probably used PowerPoint. And we wanted to lean on the infrastructure that's already in PowerPoint. So for instance, the templates, when you create a master template that is representing your site, let's say, you can have that just properly flow through your entire slide deck. You take advantage of features that are already in PowerPoint, like right there, the screen clipping. That's just built into PowerPoint. And I think even the custom animation that you can then lean on is just PowerPoint. So we wanted to kind of connect all those dots and give you a very rich experience from which you could do some prototyping, mocking here.
That's right. And let's just add a quick custom animation here so I can find a mouse pointer, searching for cursors there.
One thing to point out here, notice how Brian has typed in cursor and you've got it hit on mouse pointer. And remember how he created his own custom shape? There's essentially a bunch of meta tags behind these elements so that when you do a search for hey cursor, that is a mouse cursor, it's called mouse pointer, but you're going to hit on that.
That's right. So I'll just add a quick animation in here. I'm sure we've all done this in PowerPoint before. and we'll just resemble exactly what the user would do. So there in just a couple minutes, I've modeled some user interaction, I've created a storyboard, and this is what I can use to start getting some feedback from my users.
That's great. That's great. So now, all right, so you see how quickly you can grab the storyboarding tab that's in PowerPoint to start mocking up a user experience. And the thing I want to actually emphasize with you here is a lot of us don't have the luxury of doing file new project, right? A lot of us are dealing with existing systems. And so the concept here around like the snippet, like he grabbed a screenshot to build a new user experience over a system that he already has, is a very fundamental design principle that we have throughout a lot of these tools. You want to be able to mock up potential design changes to your existing software. And so we wanted to give you some easy ways of doing that, okay? So that's great. At this point, I think I want to switch gears now. You've got an ability to take these requirements in from the business or whoever you're getting these requirements from, and now you need to do some project management, right? So now you need to figure out, okay, I've got an existing sprint, I've got, or whatever you're using, whatever process you're using. Now I need to figure out what priority do these new requests take? How should I deal with that? And in Visual Studio 2010, we've had Team Foundation. In fact, how many people are using Team Foundation Server today? Show of hands. Okay, that's a lot. Okay, good. We've had the Team Foundation Web Access for a while now. Okay, in Visual Studio 11, we're enhancing that experience even more. And so what I'd like to do is let's show them what that experience looks like, Brian. And Jason showed a little bit. We want to go a little deeper here. And then there is a breakout session with Aaron and Peter later that I'll talk to you about later and give you that number. But let's go into that now.
That's right. So this is the new TFS Web Access. This is what you'll get whether you're using the cloud-hosted version of the Team Foundation service or if you set up an on-premises Team Foundation Server 11. And so here you can see there's some things that are brand new for this portal experience. So you can notice I've got all my build reports here. I can also do things like queue builds, which is something you couldn't do in previous releases. You saw Jason go into source control earlier. And if I drill into a file that I might want to edit, maybe I just need to make a quick change to web config. This isn't working today, so you won't be able to make changes here, but very soon we will be enabling the ability for you to come right into the web access portal, make a file edit, and check that in, maybe create a build, and you're good to go.
Yeah, now the idea here is let's not go do a bunch of deving right here in the browser, right? It's one of those, especially like in the web config spot, oh man, we just screwed up this, this connection string or what have you. You just need to make a quick change, get that up there, have a real quick, fast and fluid user interface, and go, right?
It's a reimagining of our TFS
It
Web
is
Access.
very bold.
Yes. And so we also have this new concept of teams. And so you may have a lot of people who have access to your team project, but oftentimes there's smaller feature teams that work within that team project. And so now you can give those teams an identity. You can notice I've got four people on my team. And we also have a common backlog as well. So if I jump over to the backlog for this team, you'll notice this is a place that Jason was showing this morning where you can just quickly come in here and maybe customer should see weather alerts on portal. So we'll add that.
1 second here. How are folks doing this today? How many folks are using some sort of agile methodology in their processes today? Show of hands. Quite a few. The folks who aren't doing that, that's okay too. Like this isn't, I want to make sure that you understand that this isn't just for agile folks. This is if you're managing any kind of project, you can still make use of this. It's some people think that this is just about agile in the capital A sense, and that's not the case. Just FYI.
That's a good point. And so you can see here that I can quickly reprioritize this. I can drag and drop things around, and those will be saving against the backlog. The nice thing is that I can get history on this too, so I can open up these work items and I can do an audit trail. So if you're a project manager going, whoa, wait a minute, I don't want people just sliding stuff around, you can check out that work item history. The other thing you'll see in the upper right here is we actually have a velocity chart front and center. So if you're using story points to estimate how much work you can take on in a given iteration, you can see here that I have historical iterations, Sprint 1 and Sprint 2, and then Sprint 3 is the current mid-flight iteration right now.
That's great. And again, the thing to emphasize here, and Brian's going to show a couple other manipulations of these work items. These are work items in Team Foundation Server. So we are manipulating the TFS database here as we manipulate these items through this web. And you'll notice it truly is extremely fast, easy. The tool is really out of your way and allows you to get in there, prioritize, do some assignments. He's going to show you some, assign to a sprint, etc. It's all manipulating Team Foundation Server work items on the back end. So anyone who's hitting your TFS portal from this web portal, whatever it is going to see that information in real time.
That's right, and since most of you are using TFS already, I think you'll appreciate this. Notice that my iterations are actually first class with dates now as well. So TFS knows, thank you, TFS knows that we're in the middle of Sprint 3 right now, and so that's what's causing this to light up the way that it is. And so speaking of Sprint 3, of course, we just added something new to our backlog. And I know that, Cameron, you wanted to see this happen yesterday. Yep. Now, of course, we would never do this in a real sprint.
That never happens.
This never happens. But for purposes of example, we'll just assign that to the current mid-flight sprint. You'll notice that actually assigned over here in the iteration path, and we can drop into Sprint 3. So now this is at the top of my sprint backlog. You'll notice that I have a bunch of capacity in here. So
one thing,
yep.
I want to make sure that everyone's kind of following along in the context here. So the previous screen was your product backlog, so that you can think of that as wherever you're dealing with higher level stories, epics in an agile sense, and now you want to get a sense of, okay, how are we breaking this down? Now Brian's going into a particular sprint, and in this particular sprint, which could be however long you decide a sprint could be it a week, be it 4 weeks, what have you, this is how you're going to break those product backlogs items down into tasks that make up those items. And that's what he's showing here now.
That's right. So let's do that right now. So maybe you want to consume OData for weather alerts. Cameron, you love OData, so I'll let you work on that one.
That should only take about,
4 hours.
Everything's 4 hours.
Design alert UI. Annie's our designer. And then 4 hours. So you can see what I did there is I added some additional work to this sprint, and now my capacity is flashing red. So we've pushed not only our team's capacity, but our individual capacity over. And I know Cameron isn't going to want to pull long hours to try to make this happen. We don't want to put the project at risk. So one way we might resolve this is to actually come down and take a look at this PBI that hasn't started yet and punt that to a future iteration. And now we're back on track. So that's looking pretty good.
And again, Brian mentioned this a little earlier. In TFS, as you guys know, most of you folks are already using TFS. As you make changes to work items, a history of those changes is recorded. Exact same thing here. As Brian pulls that off of Sprint 3 and assigns it to a future sprint, you'll see that change in your history.
The other thing that you'll notice, too, is that you've got this burn down up here. This is actually updated in real time, so you don't have to wait for the TFS reports to refresh like you do today.
Yeah. This particular feature is one of those, I don't know about your org, but I know that my team, I've been doing sprints and using Scrum for a long time, and the amazing amount of Excel magic that I've seen teams come up to show these various different burn down charts, it's been pretty amazing. But now you don't have to deal with that. It just comes right in the box.
You still get your reports,
yep.
But this is updated in real time. And so what we can do is switch over to our task board view now. And so I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this. This will also scale to any process template you use. So if you're not using Scrum, not a problem. We'll just open up additional swim lanes based on the states of your work items. And you can see here that Cameron's working on this one now, and Annie's working on this. So I can just drag and drop. This would work with a touch screen as well, which is really cool. You can see that I have some user stories that I can collapse. Notice here, for you TFS users today, we're getting automatic roll-up. So your tasks are rolling up right onto those user stories. You can clap anytime.
Yeah, by the way, you can do that whenever you want to. So that's fine.
And then if you notice down here, let's burn down a bunch of work. And as soon as this is burned down, you'll notice up here, for those of you in the front, we just caused that work to update on the burn down. One last thing I'll show you here is you can actually pivot by person as well. So if I wanted to show just my work, maybe I'm going into a stand-up meeting, I want to talk about the things I'm working on, that's one way to do that. So I don't know if you can tell, but it's highlighting my work right there. And then the other thing we can do is we can look at all of our team members easily by swim lane and say exactly where the work is at in the system. So very, very cool stuff.
Hey, can we go off the beaten path for a second?
Maybe. It depends. Let's see.
I just want to emphasize something. When he's dragging between, these items that are to do, and then we show it in progress and it's completed, we're manipulating a number of fields in the TFS work item. And just to drive that point home, on one of those items that you said, hey, we're done,
Sure.
if you tried to move that back into in progress, what happens? So you get this error. And the reason why is because as you move that thing over into done, we cleared out the work remaining field, right? But as you said, oh, we're not quite done, we got to move it back to in progress, that field you need to give TFS an indication of how much more work needs to be there, and it indicates that to you.
Yep.
Okay. So at this point, we've got the requirements. We've now figured out, we've got some tooling here to manage those, the prioritization, understand how you assign that to your team, understand team capacity, look at past velocity in your past sprints to understand how much can the team actually take on, et cetera. And now it's time to start thinking about how to go and build this. Like, you saw Brian take one of those product backlog items and start to break it down into tasks. At some point, someone needs to take one of those tasks and figure out, okay, what does that really look like? You've got to go actually touch some code. And you have to understand, before you get into that code, what is it that you're getting yourself into, right? You make one change over here can break something way over here if you're not careful. That's never happened to anybody. No. How many times you heard, oh, it works on my machine? I can't believe that happened on the server. Really? The server's on fire? What happened? This happens all the time. So what we've put into the product, and we put it in there in Visual Studio 2010, and we've enhanced it in Visual Studio 11, is this idea of doing architectural discovery with DGML graphs. Has anybody seen this? DGML graphs? A couple folks? Okay. For the folks who haven't seen this, I think you're in for a treat. So the idea is I need to understand what my system looks like. So in Visual Studio 11, and actually you can do this in 2010, and I'll show you the differences here. You can reach up to the architecture menu, grab Generate Dependency Graph, and say for solution. Now what's going to happen is Visual Studio is going to go and do a build of your solution. This solution was clean, and so it's going to go build it, generate out the assemblies out of each of these projects, and then we're going to go into those assemblies and reflect on those assemblies looking for dependencies. And we're looking for dependencies in a number of forms. You're using calls, you've included in a namespace, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're going to take that information, and what's new in Visual Studio 11 is we're going to populate that into a local cache, a local database where that information goes. Okay? And then you get a diagram like this. All right? Now, for those who have seen this, this is what you would expect with some new interesting visuals that I'll get into in a second. But the thing that I want to emphasize here is we spent a lot of time in this current version to make this scale to the biggest of code bases. And so the thing that I want to point out before I show you some of these other features is I've got down here, I've got loaded 19 nodes and 52 links. Okay? As I start to drill into this, I'm actually going to pull more data in, and you'll see now we've loaded 24 nodes and 74 links. In Visual Studio 2010, we would have populated this diagram with all the information in your solution. Okay? So if you've got a really, really, really big solution, you're going to need a lot of memory. Okay? We've solved that in Visual Studio 11. But the interesting thing about this is because we've got this client-side database cache, if I close this now and say no, and go and rebuild, okay? I'm sorry, rebuild. I'm going to generate the diagram again. This time we're going to make sure we've built, and then we're just going to hit the cache and show the diagram. So you don't wait. That's fine. That's okay. Okay. What can you do with this at this point? Now, for the folks who haven't seen this, what you see here is these blue boxes here represent your DLLs, all right? The lines between them, we call internally, you won't see this in any documentation, we call this the blood vessels and arteries kind of view, are dependencies between those assemblies. So, this is basically saying, hey, I've got web test DLL that is dependent on my extranet web DLL. And I can actually drill into that, okay? And now I'm seeing a namespace. And as I drill into that, I click on that, and I go and I see, oh, I've got a class in there. And as I drill into the class, I can actually see methods inside that class, okay? And as I start clicking on the methods, I see down to the method level dependency links show up to show you exactly what that particular class is dependent on, okay? One other thing to emphasize here is that you'll notice down here, I've got an externals. Now I'm going to use my scroll wheel. I can zoom in here. What this externals box is it's basically showing you all the system assemblies or third-party assemblies that your system is dependent on, right? And it's not showing you every namespace in, let's say, core lib. It's only showing you namespaces that you are actually using. So a lot of times it's very good to get into a system and understand, hey, what's at the foundation? Is this a web app or what have you? And you can really get a good understanding about your system by understanding what it's built on. Make sense? Good?
Great.
Okay.
And this is the one demo that isn't going to match exactly what you have in the developer preview today.
Yeah, that's right. We're showing you some more recent bits here just to make sure you see what's coming. Okay. Now, the idea here is, okay, you got the requirements. I'm now manipulated product backlog priorities. Okay, now I understand how I've taken some tasks and assigned it to our dev team. Okay, that dev team's now taking a look at their system and they're understanding what exactly that system is made up through these architectural discovery graphs and DGML, right? Now the thing is, we want to make sure that your devs and you stay in the zone, so to speak. In an 8-hour workday, how much focused time do your devs get? Numbers. Give me an idea. In an 8-hour workday. 6? 4? 2? Ouch. That 2 actually is quite common, right? The idea is this. Your devs are in their office. They're just trying to get something done. And somebody keeps swooping in and saying, hey, I need X, Y, Z. I need you to go do blah. Happens all the time. I never do that to my team.
No, of course not.
But I hear it happens a lot. And the idea is we've put some features in the product to help the developers, help you guys stay in the zone as much as we possibly can. And so we've put in this just general features called My Work, right? It's actually better, let's just show them what it does, Brian.
Sure. So this is the brand new Team Explorer. So those of you that are familiar with Team Explorer already know that this is how you communicate from Visual Studio back to Team Foundation Server. Grab your source control, your work items, your reports, what have you. And so we felt that there was a lot of really cool functionality we could add here that would really make your life easier as a developer. And so the first of those is My Work. If I drop into here, you can see that it's pulling all of the work that's currently assigned to me. And we also have this in-progress work. So I said, I'm going to work on this particular work item. And at that point forward, Visual Studio started keeping track of all the files that I opened, any breakpoints that I set. If I had multiple monitors, it keeps track of all the positions of those windows across multiple monitors, so that when Cameron comes to me and says, hey, I need you to work on this bug right away, drop everything you're doing, I'm not going to lose that valuable context.
Yeah, so the idea is you're like, that's great, that's great. Thanks for that. So yeah, it happens all the time. You're right there. You're about to figure out that really complicated bug, and someone comes in here and just throws you all off. And now you got to go. You step past the issue, and it's gone now. You got to start over. And this context is very important to understand that it's more than just window positioning, and we're going to show you this. It's also what breakpoints did you have set. It basically rehydrates this as you start to switch. So let's show them.
That's right. So I'll just click on Suspend, and you can see that I'm working on that particular work item, so I already have a relevant comment there. I'll click on Suspend. It's going to save those changes. It's backing this up as a shelf set to Team Foundation Server.
How many folks have used the shelf set functionality in Team Foundation Server? Okay. This feature, if you're making changes, builds on top of that capability. So in this particular situation, Brian was already in progress and then had to suspend this task, and then we essentially take all the files that were in motion essentially and shelve it.
That's right. And so we know that one of our team members is out sick today, so I'm going to show you a new feature. That's the ability to finally search for work items right within Team Explorer. That didn't get an applause.
Yeah,
I thought that was a pretty cool one. Yeah.
You guys really using TeamFest?
Thank you.
Yeah, this is nuts.
Whoops. Oh, it's Canadian. That's what I'm looking for. There's my bug. And so we have a team member that's out today, so I'm just going to put this back on my plate so that it shows up as part of my work. And go back to my work here. By the way, my work is defined by a query, so you can actually change which work comes in. By default, it's any tasks, it's any bugs, it's any code review requests that are coming in, but you can change that to highlight other work that's in the system. And here you can see that I have this bug that I'm going to work on. I'll just right-click and say Add to in progress, and now it knows that I'm working on this particular bug. So I think that the fix for this is to actually go up to our data access layer and go into models. And we've got this address, and don't you just love it when the fix is just commented out already? I wish all bugs could be that easy.
It doesn't happen to you guys?
And, you know, I've got this new regular expression that's going to be sensitive to both Canadian and US zip codes, and so I think that's right, but Cameron, I know you've spent some time in Canada. I'd love to have you take a look at this. So I'm going to request a review here. So we've got code reviews built straight into the workflow here.
How many folks are doing code reviews today? Oh, that's great. You're doing code reviews today? Many folks? Hands up again? I just didn't. Okay, great.
And if you think about the way code reviews probably happen today, I probably call you, I IM you, and say, hey man, I'm ready to check this in. Can you take a quick look at this? But that's not necessarily respectful of your time. So what I'd love to do is actually shelve this to TFS and just make it part of your work so that when you're ready, when you're in the zone, you can take a look at this. So I'll go ahead and submit this request.
And you can actually add multiple folks there as well.
That's right. I could add 3-4 people, have them all look at it, have just the first one respond. And now if we switch over to your desktop, you should be able to give me a code review.
Okay. So we're simulating the, I'm jumping in here now. I come in, I refresh my work area, come in here, and now I see in my work tab, I see code reviews and requests, like incoming requests, okay? All I need to do once I am ready, you know, so I don't have to be interrupted by, you know, Brian coming in, hey man, can you do a code review? You know, thanks, you just destroyed my debug session, thanks for that. I can now, you know, go and work on that as I have time by just simply double clicking on that. And now I'm into a code review experience. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, yeah, I'm going to accept this code review. And I'm going to take a look at the various files that are inside that code review. So for instance, you know, does this regex look right? This is the comment that Brian put in there. I could reply directly to this. I could go and click on the file that he's talking about, and I can see a number of different things here. What you're seeing is Visual Studio 11's new diffing feature, and this is what we call an inline diff feature. I can also come up here and say, and you'll have to bear with us, this is all engineering art in the toolbar right now. But I can go, hey, I can look at this side by side and see what is changed, okay? Or go back to inline mode. But at this point, I can come back here and say, all right, you know, Brian, does the regex look right? Yeah, as far as I can tell, you know. And I can also go in here and I say, yeah, but you know what? If we're doing this for Canadian folks, I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to add a comment. And I basically want to say, you know, let's make this postal code, okay? Great. And so I've inserted a code review comment right there in the editor here. And now, thank you. And I want to point out one more thing. Thanks, Brian. You see this little tab right here? Has anyone seen this tab in your as you've been playing with Visual Studio at all? No one? This is going to be you're going to love this feature as a dev moving forward as you start to use Visual Studio. This is what we call the Preview tab. You may hear some Microsoft folks call this the Provisional tab. That was like an internal name. This is the Preview tab coming in Visual Studio 11. And the idea is this. How many times have you guys started debugging and you start stepping through your code? Okay? And as you're stepping into new files, those files are being opened in your Dockwell. Okay? And by the time you're done with a significant debug session, you've got 250 files in your Dockwell. Right? Did that happen a couple times? The idea behind the preview tab here is, as you're stepping, those files are coming up in that preview tab. Okay? And so your dock well isn't being cluttered. And so when you're done, it's just cleaned up. There's nothing in your dock well unless you do a couple things. You could make a change in the file, which will automatically promote the file that's in your preview tab into your dock well. Or you can manually go up to the tab and promote it explicitly right here. But again, that's great. Again, the idea here is keep you in the zone and not having to do workspace cleanup like activities, right? And you're going to see lots and lots and lots of features in Visual Studio 11 taking advantage of this new feature. So in this case, I'm doing a code review. I don't necessarily, it's a temporal thing. I only want to see that just for a little bit. So we put that in the preview tab, and away we go. Okay? So great. So now I'm just going to say finish here, and I'm done. That code review is complete, Brian. Back to you.
So I'm going to open this up and check out your code review by looking at my work once again. So if I just refresh my work, you'll notice that I now have this code review request coming back from Cameron. I can double click on that. Notice that he said, yep, this looks good. Postal code, I like that idea. I'll do that in a future iteration. Go to pending changes. And Canada is going to love us again. Awesome. So we'll check that in, and we're good to go. Now at this point, you may remember I was working on some other changes earlier. So if I go back to my work now, you can see that I have this suspended work, and I can just say resume. It's opening up my breakpoints, all my windows, and we're good to go.
Awesome. That's great. So, just to recap on that, because sometimes this is really hard to demonstrate. Folks don't see it and understand exactly what's happening. But that you had breakpoints that were reestablished. If you had multiple monitor layouts and you've got, your windows are spread all over the place and you took, probably way too long to get them exactly where you want them to go, this puts them all right back where they were as you worked on that task.
That's right.
Okay, great. So now there's a few more things that we have done in terms of developer productivity around sprint execution, et cetera. And that's around unit testing and code clones. So you folks have probably, everyone doing unit testing at this point? Unit testing? Not as many hands as I should see, actually. Unit testing at this point has been, kind of one of these things that to write quality code, it's become best practice in many ways. We've had unit testing in the product since, 2005?
Sure, yep.
Yeah. And in Visual Studio 11, what we've done is we've created a new experience for unit testing, and we have opened it up to the multitude of unit testing frameworks that are out there. So if you are using NUnit, it will work inside Visual Studio. If you are using XUnit, it will work inside Visual Studio. If you are using whatever unit, it will work inside Visual Studio, okay? So it's up to you. It's whatever, whatever you're using. Give me a show of hands. So the folks who are doing unit testing, NUnit? Yep. If it's not NUnit, what else? XUnit? MS Test? Yeah, that continues to work too. And we've also added another framework, C++. Anybody doing C++ work? Okay. We've added a C++ framework that plugs right into this new user experience that we're about to show you as well. Okay. And the idea is this will be a public API. It'll be a surface area that will be very well documented. And we're going to have lots of support for various and different frameworks. Like for instance, as an exercise that I was doing just to keep my team on their toes, I took jQuery's QUnit. Has anyone used that? QUnit? I took that and wrote some code and plugged it into this into our framework here. Worked like a champ. Okay. In fact, I'll probably need to put that up on my blog so that folks can see that sample code at some point.
You're pretty well committed at this point now that you've just announced it to a room full of people.
I guess I'm doing that.
Yeah. So when you get your developer preview bits, the way you turn this on is basically go to the Unit Test Explorer. Now, unfortunately, you won't have support for NUnit or XUnit today. That's being worked on. I have an early drop within this virtual machine. So when you download the virtual machine, you'll get the support for NUnit, but you won't be able to add that to your own projects until we make that available with our partners later on. But now if you get this Unit Test Explorer, what I like to do is take this and dock it over on the left-hand side because it's actually a kind of a full, tall window that lights up. And if I build this solution now, it's going to look across my entire solution for any unit tests matching the adapters that are installed. So in this case, MS Test and in-unit. And they'll all just show up. So if you have people on your team that are using MS Test and then they download a project that has in-unit tests and just plug that into the solution, it's just right there.
That's a great point. If you have multitude of frameworks that you're also using on the same product, let's say MS Test and N-unit and X-unit, it'll all show up in the same UI.
That's right. So I'm just going to click on Run All. It's spinning up the build engine. So for the first time, it may take a few seconds. On subsequent runs, it's going to be much, much faster. We've heard you loud and clear. We know that you need to be able to quickly do that red-green refactor. Make sure that works. So there you saw it run really quickly. Now let me just run it one more time. You'll see it's even faster. If you see here, we've got a failing test. I can double-click on that, and you'll see this is an in-unit test. Down here at the bottom, this is the reason you want to have the full real estate over here. You can see I can jump straight to the source of the failing test, or where's my stack trace? There it is. I also have the stack trace that shows me exactly where there was an exception being thrown in the code that was being tested.
That's great.
So I'll just make one change here. There's currently a bug in the developer preview. You do have to do a rebuild in order for your changes to take effect. We're obviously working on that. And so now if I want, I can select this particular test, run that failed test. It's going to rerun that again, and you can see that pass now. So go to Aaron Bjork and Peter Provost's session. They're going to be showing a lot more related to not only the Agile dashboards, but also unit testing as well.
That's right. So for the folks that saw Jason Zander's talk this morning, he mentioned code clones. He actually showed it in the keynote as well. I want to show you our code clone feature in here, and let me give you some background on this. Turns out the most used code reuse mechanism on the planet by far is cut, copy, paste. Yep, that's right. Cut, copy, paste. So there's a lot of problems with that particular pattern. And I'm not going to go into the philosophy about why that's a bad thing. However, I do want to talk about the tooling in Visual Studio 11 to help you detect when your team has gone awry with that particular pattern. And it's called code clones. And the idea behind code clones is to show you where in your system you have exactly matching code, similar code, or code that looks and smells quite similar, though may not be exact. This is an example of a great interaction between a product team, my team, and Microsoft Research. And we've basically taken the big brains in Microsoft Research to come up with these very complicated heuristics of how we go through your code, because it's not just a grep or a regular expression match. There's some complicated heuristics there to go search your solution for clones. Okay. Let's show that.
That's right. So currently I have my solution open. The first way to launch code clones is just to go to Analyze and then say Analyze Solution for Code Clones. And so this is going to be looking for rather coarse-grained blocks of code that look similar. So it's not going to say, hey, you've got int x equals 0 scattered throughout your project. But it's looking for rather substantial blocks of code. And for those of you with 2020 vision, you can notice here that these two are just about identical. The only difference down here is that we're redirecting to two different pages. So that gives me a really good candidate for maybe doing some refactoring, taking that redirect action and putting that as an argument to that particular method. The other thing I can do is drop into a particular file and say, maybe this seems like something that I'm doing a lot across my project. I can just highlight it, right-click, and say find matching clones in the solution, and now it's looking for clones that match that just two-line band. And so here you can see I have the original, I have the exact match, and I also have some medium matches as well. So there you have a customer repository.delete, whereas the original was, I've already forgotten, it was insert or update. And so this, again, gives you a few different tools that it can allow you to say, hey, maybe this is a good candidate for refactoring. Maybe if I'm making a bug fix over here, I also need to make that bug fix throughout. Or maybe I just want to see, hey, the last time Cameron wrote this code, did he write it in a try-catch? Maybe I should follow his pattern or do the opposite, as the case may be.
Yeah,
so,
sure. Let's find the anti-pattern. Yeah. That's great. This particular tool, we were actually kind of debating, whether or not we should put this menu item like under the refactoring menu, because it's one of those things where as you're looking for refactoring targets, this is one of those things that could really help a lot. But I think that Brian alluded to the scenario around I need to fix this code, I'm going to change this code, but where else in my system do I have this bug as well? You can find that before you actually fix that one locale. So this is good stuff.
That's right.
Okay, great. So now we're going across. Can we bring up that's the slide there just to show this again, just to reset everyone's memory here. So we started at the top. We took requirements in. We manipulated our product backlog. We got into the sprint. We showed you a bunch of features in Visual Studio 11 to help you execute against those tasks. Now we're getting close to the working software, so we're kind of making our way across. We're now down at the bottom here. Before we go push this stuff into production, we need to do some testing. And we really want to spend some time to show you some very cool testing features that we've got in the product. In 2010, we had major investments in the test space, and we wanted to show our continued investment there by showing you the exploratory test runner and why that's extremely important for you as you try to get your head around, hey, I think I'm ready to go to production or not. And this is really targeted for your test organization or anyone who's doing exploratory testing. Exploratory testing, by the way, you can switch over there and start that thing up. Exploratory testing is just a fancy way of saying, I'm going to go kick the tires on the product. And as I find problems, I'm going to log bugs, right? I mean, that's exploratory testing, essentially. I'm sure I'm brutalizing that, but it really is, that's the fundamental piece. Fire this thing up, run the app, and log issues as you find them.
As opposed to the opposite would be formal testing, where you're starting with your requirements and you're saying, okay, what is the list of 100 test cases I have to run on a daily basis? And with Microsoft Test Manager, we actually don't force you to choose one or the other. I could come in here and create a new test case and start writing my individual test steps, assign these to my testers, test them with each week's build, and track that progress over time. But sometimes you just want to just put your tester hat and say, let's see what I can break. And so with MTM 20 or MTM 11, we are doing exploratory testing straight from the test menu. So I can say, do exploratory testing. I could pick a requirement down here that I wanted to test against, or I could just say, I want to explore, which means I'm just going to start working with the application. Now, one of the really important problems that we've mentioned a couple of times is the old, hey, it works on my machine issue. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we give testers the ability to capture rich diagnostics as they're running their test, whether you're doing exploratory or formal testing. And we want to be able to allow you to play that back for the tester, whether that's an IntelliTrace file, a list of action recordings. You can see we enable audio and desktop video as well. So I can capture all that as I go. Here I'm just going to start testing, and at this point it's capturing information in the background, such as what windows did I click on or what links did I click on.
It's hard for your dev to say it's not in my code when the tester shows up with running video, snapshots.
Absolutely.
That's hard.
And so if I go into my Fabricam Fiber intranet portal, I'm just going to start clicking around here, and this looks pretty good. Maybe I'll jump to another record, make sure that's rendering properly. What if I see there's a delete thing over here? What if I click on delete? What happens there? And this actually looks like a bug. You can notice that customers not assigned, created, assigned to. These assignments are empty. And so I'm just taking notes as I go. I can capture a screenshot, really put it in the developer's face and say, this is what I mean. And at this point, what I can do is say, create a bug. So now what it did is you'll notice that it captured all of those actions. So I opened up the web page, I went to the intranet portal, I clicked on this, I clicked on that. And so you may have all this information that you just want to dump into the bug, which is great. You can see that I have a screenshot that's already captured. Everything I typed on the sidebar is there. Or you may want to say, I was kind of in the middle of a 45-minute testing session and I did a lot of stuff. Really, it's only the last few steps that really matter in this case. And you can come up here and say change steps. We give you this preview window and we can scope this down to the actual actions I just performed. So we'll go ahead and save that. Fields empty on delete confirmation page. And I'm going to bet this is in your code, Cameron.
It's not. It couldn't possibly be my code.
We'll check that out later. And so at this point, I can either save the bug and keep going, or I can say, you know what, I want to make sure we capture this as a formal test case. It's one thing that I had my tester hat on today. I was feeling creative. I clicked over here. We want to make sure that we test for this every single time moving forward. And so we'll go ahead and create a test case from this. Make sure delete confirmation has right values. And if you're familiar with MTM 2010, one of the things that we added here is the ability for you to do rich text formatting right within the test steps. So that's very cool. I can even come in here and say, do not confirm deletion. We'll make that red. Red's always associated with bad, scary things, right? And so at this point, I can go ahead and save that test. And if I wanted to, I could just keep testing. So the other thing we want to really respect is the tester's flow. They're in the zone. They're finding bugs. Let them get back to their testing session and find those bugs and surface those test cases. So let's say I'm done right here. I'll go ahead and end testing. It's going to save all the information for me related to that exploratory testing session. And now if I click back to my plan tab, you'll see that this is now captured automatically for me as a formal test case that I can use moving forward.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so now we've moved around the virtuous cycle here. Now we've put this thing in production. We feel good about it, right? It's running in production, and something happens. Something goes wrong, whatever it may be. And you now, as an engineering organization, need to figure out what's going wrong when something goes bump on the production server, right? That can be a very difficult, long conversation with your IT group, depends on your organization. Could get into another one of these ping pong situations, not my problem, yes, it's your problem, not my problem, that kind of thing. We want to solve that. Jason mentioned, and Satya alluded to the DevOps scenario and the rich interaction that we need to start driving between ops and developers. And at TechEd North America recently, we talked about and announced the SCOM to TFS connector, which is something that helps in this area. But the thing that I want to also point out is that sometimes you really need a lot of information coming off your production server. And that's where we want to lean on IntelliTrace in production. So in 2010, how many folks have used IntelliTrace? Great. So for you guys who have used IntelliTrace, we've always said you can't use that in production. It's not production ready, and it wasn't. We've spent some significant time in Visual Studio 11 to make it production ready, and so I'd like to show that now.
That's right. So here's my production site. You can see here that it's got an error. If I click on some of these records, it's throwing an error here. And what I want to do is actually just drop to PowerShell. And what I've done is taken a set of tools that we'll provide with you in Visual Studio 11 that you can put on a USB key. You can take over to your production server, just expand that PowerShell cab. And at this point, I can say import module. And I'm just going to select my PowerShell DLL here. And that's going to give me a number of commands that I can start working with. So if I say git command *intelli, then that shows me the number of commands. So I have a few here to choose from. I can start capturing a collection. So I can attach this to an application pool, and we'll start capturing IntelliTrace data for you behind the scenes. So that looks like what I want to do here. So I'll say start collection. I'll give it the name of the application pool.
And while he's doing that, for the folks that haven't heard or have seen IntelliTrace, this is our historical debugging capability that we actually introduced in Visual Studio 2010. If you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend go watch a Channel 9 video on it. Really dig into that because it's very powerful tech.
That's right. So I've just specified my command, my application pool, a location where I want to dump the log files. So it's important to make sure that your ASP.NET process has the permissions to write into that location. And then finally, the collection plan as well. So I have either kind of a basic or a verbose. We're going to crank this thing up to 11. It is Visual Studio 11 after all. And we'll go ahead and start that. So at this point, it's now going to start rejitting all of the ASP.NET files that I have over there so that we can capture that rich trace information. There is a bit of performance overhead on this. We're certainly working on that, especially if you're going to run it within your production environment. But it's not going to be 100% as it would if you didn't have that turned on. And so at this point, once that's finished, I'll just go ahead and relaunch that particular portal. Remember, it's capturing all this information for me in the background.
So you've turned this up to 11, like
That's
you
right.
said, which is going to gather stack information, parameters going through the stack, et cetera. So, and we're going to show that to you in a second here.
That's right. So we're paying the one-time hit here to actually rejet that. And if we click on that particular record, basically reproducing the issue, I can now drop back to PowerShell. And I have a couple of options at this point. I can either stop collection or I can take a checkpoint because I may not be done collecting data. Yeah. And so what I'll do is I'll say checkpoint and then the name of my application pool. And so there you can see this is the file that's still being written to, and this is the one that we just checkpointed out. And so if I open that, it's going to open up in Visual Studio 11 Ultimate for me.
Now, watch carefully. Visual Studio is going to open, and it is going to look like it is in a debug state, and it is in a debug state. However, this application is not running. This is, again, the historical debugger. You can think of this as an extremely rich log file that has all kinds of information like performance characteristics of your gets, which is new in 11, as well as all your exception information and your threading information. And why don't we dig into one of those exceptions?
That's right. So here we have a null reference exception. That looks interesting. If I say start debugging, it's now going to show me on the right-hand side all of my individual IntelliTrace events. So this looks familiar if you've used IntelliTrace. Here I'm throwing and catching exceptions. I've got my ASP.NET Git events. You can turn on and off exactly what's interesting to you. Maybe registry rights are interesting to you. And here's the line of code that corresponds to where that exception was being thrown. So you can see that because I had that verbose information, you'll actually notice here that assign2 is equal to null, and of course that's causing my problem because we're not doing any sort of smart logic to say, hey, if it's null, maybe just write a smart string there. So in the interest of time, I won't fix it, but that allowed us to quickly get in and understand exactly what the problem was on my production system.
That's great. So at this point, we can pop back to that slide. At this point, we've gone the entire circle. We've gone around this loop, and we've showed you a lot of new capabilities in the product. Here's the deal, though. We've just touched on it, right? And what I want to show you and talk about is make sure that you understand the various other breakout sessions here that you should go and look at if you are interested. So like Doug Newman's talk here, this is where he's going to talk a lot about Team Foundation Server, the hosted Team Foundation Server that Jason talked about today. Definitely check that out if you're interested in how that's all working. Brian mentioned Aaron's and Peter's talk. If you were interested in the project dashboard that we showed you and how we manipulated that task board and via the web, the web interface and the unit testing frameworks, go to this session. They're going to go deep on all the capabilities there. If you're interested in the IntelliTrace bit that we just showed you and how that really works in production and what you can do or cannot do with that, go see Mark Groves and Tracy Truman talk about that particular piece of technology in this particular session here. Highly recommend that. Jamie Kuhl is going to talk about a lot of the developer productivity enhancements that we've done to TFS itself. He's going to talk about local workspaces and a bunch of great Team Foundation Server features, both on the client and the server side.
They may not appreciate how cool local workspaces are.
Yeah. No, you absolutely got to see it. You got to experience it. Highly recommend Jamie's talk because we did not have enough time to go into any of those details. Highly recommend this, especially if you're using Team Foundation Server, which a lot of you are. We've got a number of new features in the C++ area. Go see this talk if you're interested in how Jason showed a code analysis window and how we are doing that. Great stuff here. Highly recommend go see Vince and Jason's talk around code analysis and the new experience that we have in Visual Studio 11. Jason showed this a little bit. I wanted to show a quick look at what a C++ unit test looks like. That's coming in Visual Studio 11. That's what it's C++. It's not managed C++. This is straight C++ with all the macro magic there. And then, of course, if you want to dig into more on the C++ side, highly recommend watching a video that Terry Leeper did in Tech Ed, and it's up there right now. You could watch it right now to go and look at a number of other features that we have done for native developers in regards to the ALM toolset that you've seen today. Last but not least, if you're interested in the architectural discovery stuff that I showed earlier on around the dependencies in your system, go check out Mark Groves and Tracy Truan's talk late in the day Friday to go and really drill into the capabilities there. The setup that we have in the exhibit hall is really a great one because we've got the booths right next to the hands-on labs area. So as we're having a conversation, we can kind of jump over to a hands-on lab. You can take the bits out for a test drive. We can have a conversation about it. Highly recommend you go check this out. Brian has done an unbelievable amount of work to get those hands-on labs to the point where we feel good about it. Definitely go do that.
And then starting tomorrow, you'll be able to download them from my blog, so you can take them back, show your boss what you've been learning, all that cool stuff.
Yeah. And the end-to-end documentation, we're really trying to make the documentation for all of this functionality. One of the most common things that we heard as we launched Visual Studio 2010 was, man, the surface area of all the new capabilities that you put into this product is unbelievable. How am I going to come up to speed on all this new functionality? We've really started to spend a lot of time to try to figure out, hey, how do we get you into all these features? How do we bring you up to speed on that as fast as we possibly can at your pace? Check out the docs that are coming, and let's get your feedback on that. With that, I very much appreciate you guys showing up here. This build has been and will be continue to be a very exciting event. Please get us the feedback in regards to that slate. Any bits you take for a test drive in the hands-on labs. Come by the booth. I will be at the booth Thursday morning and Friday morning. Please come by. Let's have a conversation. Really appreciate you coming. Thanks a lot.